Korea National University, and this is one of the follow-ups of that official visit, and we look forward to further and more cooperation and partnership in the future with Korea National Defense University. The lecture that we're going to listen today is important in the sense that nowadays we can hardly study any particular country without putting that country in the perspective of its region, of its surrounding region. That is why East Asia is one of the keywords in the title of the lecture that we're going to listen to this morning. We also have here in this faculty Southeast Asian Studies program, which is the characteristic that distinguishes our Southeast Asian Studies program is that it's an inter-regional Southeast Asian Studies program in which we also look at East Asia and East Asia as part of the defining nature of Southeast Asia. So they are now inseparable from one another. And it is in that context we're going now to listen to a lecture specifically focused on Korea. But then we will also look at how it impacts the Northeast Asian region in terms of security architecture in that region. So without further ado, please join me to welcome Professor Kyengho.
University. He has worked extensively in various countries, including in Indonesia, especially with the Indonesian Defense University. He got his PhD of history from Ohio State University, and at the moment, besides working as a professor at KNDU, he also serves as the chair of the Department of Military Strategy at Korean National Defense University. His area of expertise includes military history, the Korean War, and military strategy. And it is a privilege for us to learn from him today. So without further ado, I would like to invite our speaker, Professor Kyengho, to start his lecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes, thanks. It's my great honor. I think I'm so privileged to be here and in my presentation about the history of Northeast Asia. Since I became a professor at Korean National University, I have often run into some faculties or scholars from your country. Because I'm a historian, usually they are historians of Indonesia. At the time, we had shared some perspectives or experiences. For the past years, I realized that we had spent very different times, although we had the same period, because we were in different locations. So I made my mind, if I had some opportunities, I would share the perspectives or stories of Koreans during the Cold War. Because unlike you, Koreans have many unfortunate happenings during the Cold War. We experienced the Korean War with colossal damage. And also, we have experienced very hard times even after the Korean War. So that will be very different from your perspectives or ideas to recall 1950s, 60s, and 70s, even the era after the Cold War. So I finally find very precious opportunity to be here and meet with young, bright guys of the university. Because as the Vice Deacon introduced, I visited here to conclude MOU with OE and Korean National Defense University. I was here as the credential of special envoy on behalf of my university and president. So it is my great honor to deliver my speech before concluding MOU between the two great institutions. Well, I will talk about the Cold War, military, war, military strategy, which are very sanguine to your ears. And then it would not be very familiar to your concepts or ideas to understand history. However, these terms or concepts are familiar with South Koreans who had spent hard times during the Korean War. Well, to deliver my idea, I will start from the stories World War II. And the stories about post-bellum era, and I will move to the Korean War. And also, I will deal with a little bit history or events of current time. So just follow me and hear me and listen to me, and then we will have a Q&A session after the end of my presentation. It would be easy to start from World War II. Although Northeast Asians had not involved in World War seriously, like Westerners, our ancestors had been belligerents of one side and damaged physically and financially. The main theater of World War II was Europe, Africa, and some part of Middle Eastern countries. Europeans had experienced huge loss of lives during the war. For instance, Russians lost more than 20 million people in the war for the defense of their fatherland. In addition, the world witnessed a genocide of Jews in many places conducted by Germans. In Asia, Japan was the main culprit to invade neighboring countries, including Korea. To conduct the war, the US and Great Britain devised a kind of grand strategy. President Roosevelt determined to put priority of war efforts on Germany rather than Italy and Japan. It was a strange idea in the sense of national threat. Japan had been a direct threat to the United States even before the Pearl Harbor surprise. The US operational planners expected War Plan Orange, codename of Japanese invasion to the US territory, more seriously compared to Operation Black, codename War Plan of Germany. The US had developed the war plans before World War II and named them the colors. In the case of UK, the operation color was red. Japanese had been expected to attack US interests or territories across the ocean. This priority on Japan had been the basic strategy to conduct the war among the allies, including the Soviet Union. The US supported war efforts of the Soviet Union with Lend-Lease Act, which provided weapons, materials, and equipment. The help of the US was the most important factor that sustained the Russians right after their devastating defeat by German armed forces since the beginning of Operation Barbarossa, which took place in 1941 summer. At least, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin had agreed upon the principle because only Germany had industrial capabilities as well as military effectiveness to threaten security of European countries. Even the US. During the war, major member countries of allies had maintained strong cooperative posture. Of course, such a cooperation was an inevitable option to overcome the challenge of Axis countries, which would not happen naturally. After the outbreak of the war, Winston Churchill mentioned that to cope with great evil, we need to work with small evil. That means the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union was established in 1917, European countries did not welcome the communist regime. Some countries dispatched units to support White Russia. Moreover, Western countries remembered the Russian betrayal during World War I. After the success of revolution, the Soviet Union surrendered to Germany and withdrew from the war. After all, the cooperation of allies to be turned out to be so fragile when proper conditions appear. The first crack among the allies in World War II would be the problem of opening the second front. Up until the landing at Normandy, there had been no Western soldiers in European soil. The operation took place in June 1944. That means the Soviet Union only had suffered great loss of lives until that time, including Stalingrad in 1947. Stalin suspected that the UK and the US were plotting to kill Russians with the hands of Germans. The similar problem happened too in Far East. Facing the surprise of Japan, the US needed air bases to launch strategic bombing against Japan. Before occupying islands in the Middle Pacific, the US asked its bases from Siberia, but declined by Stalin. Stalin instead of giving the permission, argued that the US should provide just B-29 bombers to the Soviet Union. Then Russians would conduct bombing against Japan. Secondly, while the end of the war was coming closer, the Soviet Union became aggressive in terms of expanding the sphere of influence. The Russians established global government on Poland, delegitimizing resistance government in Great Britain. In addition, the Soviet Union occupied Eastern Poland with the March of the Red Army. The US and the UK were upset about the Soviet behavior. However, there were no Western soldiers to stop Soviet invasion in Eastern Europe. There was no option but to expect a Soviet mercy on Eastern European countries' destiny. As a result, with the end of the war, the great allies were divided and began to conflict each other. Furthermore, Roosevelt passed away during the war, who was a strong proponent of the Soviet Union as one of the four major participant countries to support post-Berlin World War. When Harry S. Truman succeeded President of the United States, I had no idea about how to conduct the war. Roosevelt, because Roosevelt disrespected the State Department and liked to work with generals and admirals directly. Truman had been the vice president at the time, but he had not had a chance to enter war room before the death of Roosevelt. In this situation, he naturally began to rely on State Department. Right after the inauguration of Truman, the Allies won a victory in Europe. The last part was Asia. The State Department witnessed the communist aggression in Eastern Europe and devised ways to deter Soviet ambition in Asia. In contrast, uniformed officers preferred to continue the cooperation with the Soviet Union to end the war quickly and save more American lives. By the way, there seemed to be a great love to the US in July 1945. With the success of the test of the nuclear bomb on July 16, 1945, the US was able to have additional options for the war without Soviet reinforcement, but using the atomic bomb. This was adopted as a major direction to prevent Soviets' encroachment to Asian countries. Because the US kept the success of the nuclear test a secret, Stalin postponed the participation of Russian forces in the Pacific War. However, after the drop of the first nuclear bomb in Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, the Soviet Union declared war on Japan and moved into Manchuria and the Korean Peninsula, chasing Japanese forces. This was the beginning of the tragedy of Koreans. When the Soviet 25th Army rolled into Manchuria and Korea, there were no available US troops in the vicinity. The nearest forces were in Okinawa, the 24th Corps, under the command of Lieutenant General John Hodge. To stop the march of the Soviet troops, the US policymakers suggested the 38th Parallel as a division line for the occupation of Allied forces. The Soviet Union accepted the proposal and withdrew from their initial position in the Korean Peninsula. Now, Koreans were separated into political entities due to the military movements of great powers. The Cold War should be understood from the conflicts between great powers of World War II. However, if there were no confrontations between the US and the Soviet Union thereafter, the concept would not be made. Upon the continuation of Soviet's aggressive foreign policies, George Kennan, a US diplomat studied in Yale University, sent a long telegram of 8,000 words explaining the reason of Soviet behaviors. According to Kennan, Russians' behaviors were not new phenomena. It was a tradition of Russian politics. Russian governments traditionally had suppressed its people and described the foreign powers as evil filled with territorial ambitions. In 1947, he published The Sources of Soviet Conduct to Foreign Affairs with the name of Mr. X. He explained that Soviet's expansion resulted in his desire to secure buffer zones for foreign invasions rather than expansionist motivations. In this sense, communist research should be regarded as a mere tool to justify their behaviors. To tackle the Soviet expansion, Kennan suggested containment. Based on Kennan's idea, there were five industrial and military centers in the world at the time: the US, Great Britain, Central Europe, including Germany, Japan, and the Soviet Union. Among these five centers, the US was the only strong and healthy center in terms of communist influence after World War II. The Soviet Union was the center of communism. Three others were damaged by the war severely and under the attack of communist propaganda. Kennan argued that the Soviet Union had conducted its expansion not with military capabilities, but with psychological ways like propaganda. According to him, Stalin did not have a timetable of occupation like Hitler. Kennan suggested a strategy to counter Soviet's intention. He argued that psychological ways were the best options to deal with the Soviet psychological offensive. The US should provide a conviction that there would be a better situation in the world and boost the three centers in economic sense, and that those centers could recover confidence to handle communism. This would contribute to the formation of balance of power. At the same time, he suggested to exploit conflicts among communist countries. And finally, Kennan emphasized to persuade the Russians to make them understood that they could exist with other people in the world without war. These were the main points of the containment strategy. The first implementation of the containment strategy was Truman Doctrine, announced on March 12, 1947. Truman intended to cope with communist guerrillas in Greece and Russian ambition on the Bosphorus Strait of Turkey. In fact, the guerrillas were not agents of the Soviet Union. They had received Yugoslavian support from 1944. In the case of Turkish territory, Stalin once asked to fight over a Bosphorus Strait at Yalta Conference, but rejected by the United States, and asked it directly to the Turkish government. To dispel communist guerrillas in Greece, Truman and State Secretary Dean Acheson decided to dispatch 315 military advisors and provide $2.5 billion as well as military equipment to help Turkey. They funded the Turkish government with $1.5 billion. Truman mentioned that a rotten apple would contaminate a full box of apples. And the success of communism in Greece would bring communism in the Middle East, Africa, and eventually Europe. The logic of Truman Doctrine had different approach with that of original containment strategy. Some of you may remember that Kennan noticed centers not peripheries like Greece and Turkey. In addition, Kennan supported psychological methods, not a direct approach and military assistance. The first implementation of the containment strategy had a very different feature of the strategy. The second one had more similar aspects of the strategy. That was Marshall Plan announced on June 5, 1947. At the time, Europe was in a dire situation with the result of World War II. Most of all, communists were gaining seats in parliaments due to economic hardships and social instabilities. Communist parties would win elections in Italy and even France. The US was on the brink of losing Western countries due to post-bellum problems. In this sense, the US launched economic and financial support to Great Britain, France, Germany, and other European countries to the amount of $13 billion to fiscal year 1952. With this help, European countries were able to recover damage from war and develop economies for reconstruction. The Marshall Plan would remain as the most successful foreign assistance program. In Northeast Asia, the situation was different. After VJ Day, victory against Japan, August 15th, 1945, the US forces moved into the Korean peninsula below the 30th parallel. The Soviet Union initially wanted to occupy Japan for its occupation policy. However, the US rejected Russia's opinion for joint occupation policy in Japan. The US never allowed participation of the Soviet Union in the occupation in Japan. Instead, the Russians were able to sit in the northern part of the Korean peninsula. Meanwhile, China was under civil war. Communist Chinese Party and Kuomintang Party resumed their war after Japanese withdrawal from the mainland. At first, the Kuomintang army seemed to have an edge over the communists because they had enjoyed great support of the US Army during World War II as a legitimate partner based on Land Lease Act. The three countries, China, Korea, Japan, had walked different paths henceforth. In the Korean peninsula, there had been competition between South and North, but in different sense. In North Korea, the Soviet Union imposed socialist ideas, land reform, education, universal suffrage, modern armed forces, and communist party ruling system. Stalin initiated to build a strong socialist regime in North Korea. In contrast, South Koreans were in chaos to find ways for their future destiny after the liberation from Japanese colonial rule. At first, they did not accept the division of nation. However, they understood the situation. Maybe Syngman Rhee, the first president of South Korea, was the first man in the peninsula who realized the limit of nationalism under the conflict between the US and the Soviet Union on the peninsula. The US military government had been neither effective nor confident. They reiterated mistakes that undermined Koreans' trust over the government. Finally, the Republic of Korea was established in August 1948 under the authority of the United Nations. Japan had been under the rule of US military government right after the war. The first priority of the US military government in Japan was demilitarization. The US intended to delete war-fighting capabilities from Japan forever. The peace constitution was the result of this effort. In addition, the US disbanded conglomerates which served military industry during war, and prohibited all the government officers, generals and admirals, and nobles from political activities. The latter was more forceful. The US held a Tokyo War trial to judge responsibilities of persons who were involved in Japanese war efforts, including Prime Minister Tojo Hideki. Several Japanese wartime leaders were interned and executed following the result of the trial. However, the progress of the Cold War, the US loosened the execution of demilitarization policy and eventually turned his policy to reinvigorate Japan's potential to counter the spread of communism in the region, especially the success of Communist China Party in 1945. China had been the place of struggle between the communists and nationalists since the beginning of the Cold War. However, the Civil War was not a new phenomenon. Since 1927, the Chinese Civil War had continued amidst the external situation, mainly the Japanese invasion. The two belligerents had agreed on ceasefire and cooperation to denial to deal with Japanese aggression from 1924 to 1927 and 1937 to 1945, 2 times. Interestingly, the Chinese Communist Party increased its capabilities using these periods. After the defeat of Japan, the two parties began a final duel to decide the ruler of the continent. The Communist Party gained victories in 1947 and finally consolidated its rule over the mainland China in 1949. The tension of the Cold War started from Germany. President Truman understood the importance of Germany, which had a key for the recovery of war-torn European countries. Germany was divided by 4 parts and under the rule of 4 different countries. Truman decided to integrate 3 German parts and initiated the integration of currency to prepare for integration. Great Britain and France, these are other occupiers of Germany, like the idea, but the Soviet Union opposed to the US intention. The Russians thought that reconstructed Germany with coalition of the Western countries would threat Russian interests in Europe. Stalin had been concerned that recovered German industries would be used for the rearmament. Most of all, German reunification would be the worst scenario to just jeopardize Soviet national security. The Russians believed that President Truman and Western leaders were plotting a scheme to encroach the interests of the Soviet Union. In this context, the Soviet Union conducted a Berlin blockade in June 1948. Berlin was an isolated place from the rest of parts of Germany. It was a great shock to President Truman. However, he had limited options. He was not able to launch a mass war because the US already began demobilization even before the end of the war. The US leaders were concerned about possible economic depression due to large population in armed forces instead of serving in industries. Furthermore, the Soviet Union retained massive armed forces in Eastern Europe, so Russian soldiers would dominate European soil in the case of contingency. The US had relied on nuclear forces at the time, but it was hard to use nuclear bombs again. As a result, the US began air supply for 10 months to provide necessary goods for residents in Berlin. The total amount of 2.5 million tons of materials were transported to the people in Berlin. Finally, the Soviet Union gave up its blockade. In Northeast Asia, the situation was in contrast. The US Joint Chiefs of Staff evaluated South Korea at 15th priority among 16 countries, which had a strategic contribution to the US security. By the way, the country ranked at the first position in terms of requiring US assistance for its survival. The assessment of the US JCS was reflected to NSC aid, which stipulated the withdrawal of US troops by December 31st, 1948. Until this point, the US had maintained US ground forces on the peninsula. Later, the NSC 8 was amended by NSC 8-2, which extended the date of withdrawal to the end of June 1949. It was the result of the forestry incident in 1948, an insurgency plotted by Korean communists to further the general election on May 10th, recommended by the United Nations. The insurgency claimed around lives and continued about 9 years thereafter. As mentioned earlier, the Chinese Communist Party was gaining victories since 1947 and enlarged its influential area dramatically in 1948. This situation brought South Korea serious security concerns in 1948. After the establishment of the government on September 9, 1948, Kim Il-sung, the leader of North Korean Workers' Party, embarked on the idea of unification of the whole peninsula. He consulted with Stalin about this idea in February 1949, but declined. Stalin was careful not to hurry. Instead, he would prefer to wait the unification of the mainland China, and then China could help North Korea for reunification efforts. At the same time, Russians were able to succeed in developing their own nuclear weapons in August 1949. In this sense, the year 1949 was a very important year. North Koreans conducted various kinds of insurgencies in 1949 to subvert South Korean government. On June 30, 1949, the last unit of the 21st Division of the United States Army left the Korean Peninsula forever, leaving military advisors to newly established Republic of Korea forces with allied weapons. In the next year, Kim Il-sung got a bold sign from Stalin. Kim and his deputy flew to Moscow to meet with Stalin and reached the final consensus to invade South Korea. In a dinner to see off North Korean ambassador to China on January 17, 1950, Kim asked permission for the war to Consul General to North Korea to speak up over drinking. His request was conveyed to Stalin, and this time Stalin gave him positive answers, as well as a promise to supply equipment to arm 10 infantry North Korean divisions. Compared to Stalin's will to strengthen North Korean armed forces, the US did not pay attention to South Korean troops. In contrast, Washington opposed procurement of weapons of South Korea to prevent any possible challenge to North Korea. In fact, President Syngman Rhee often made hostile comments against North Korea and proclaimed military advance to North. However, they were calculated remarks to convince US policymakers that South Koreans would not be defeated, unlike Kuomintang Party, which failed with huge stockpiles of US weapons. At this point, the US also had passive war plans for possible conflicts with the Soviet Union in Northeast Asia. And based on nuclear monopoly and demobilization, the US had planned operations employing nuclear bombs since 1946. The first plan was a pincher, assumed 100 Soviet divisions in Europe, and US response to destroy Russian industrial bases with 50 nuclear bombs. The idea was inherited to the next plans like Half Moon and Octeco. The basic concepts of the plans were offensive in Europe and defensive in Asia. The final version of war plan for Asia was gunpowder, which required US to secure island lines connecting Japan to the Philippines to contain the advance of Russian advance. On the occasion of gunpowder, the US forces on the Korean Peninsula was designated to withdraw to Japan with the outbreak of the war. Later, this idea was revealed with the announcement of security actions on January 12, 1950. There was one condition for Stalin's permission to Kim's military adventure: China's agreement on the war. With this, Stalin attempted to combine two Asiatic leaders in one destiny. For Mao Zedong, this was the approval of Mao's role in the revolutions of socialists in Asia. Initially, Mao had not been accepted by Stalin due to his focus on peasants to pursue communist revolution. Stalin and other Bolsheviks put trust in peasants. They preferred laborers in factories rather than peasants. while Mao conducted his revolution on the contrary to Soviet supplies and despised cadres who studied in the Soviet Union. However, Mao's success in China enabled Stalin to admit China's own strategy and ways for socialism and his ownership in Asia. Mao, of course, agreed with Kim Il-sung's suggestion to provoke a war to unify the whole peninsula. Mao gave some advices to Kim. For instance, not to stay too long time in cities and move quickly. Mao even promised military help. Before ending his meeting with Kim, Mao asked one question: the US would join the war. To convince Mao, Kim blatantly answered to his question that the US would not intervene in the war, and North Korean soldiers would move fast, not to allow the arrival of US forces on the peninsula. Kim failed to exclude US participation in the war because of the US quick response to North Korea's surprise. The war was the South Korean armed forces led soldiers to help their agricultural business loosening long-standing allowed position. North Korean attack divisions penetrated South Korean defense line easily. Major success was achieved by tank assault. South Korean army did not have tanks or proper anti-tank weapons. Within 3 days after the beginning of the war, South Korean frontal divisions were collapsed and forced to abandon their positions and allow North Koreans to move into Seoul, South Korean capital. There was a victory in the middle front by some South Korean units, for instance, 6th Division, but it could not change the whole situation. North Koreans gained great success with Soviet-made weapons and equipment and operation plans, as well as the help of Russian rivals. However, they missed two important goals. First, they failed to control the Han River Bridge in early time. Secondly, they could not annihilate all South Korean army divisions in south of the Han River due to the first failure. The success of North Korean armed forces, President Truman convened an emergency meeting at Blair House in the next day. He had stayed at his home in Independence, Missouri for his weekend. During his flight back to Washington, D.C., he thought that if this provocation was allowed, further invasion by communists would take place. And then there would be no room for small democratic countries. He recalled Munich Conference in 1938, which appeased to general mission. This time, Truman made his mind not to make such an appeasement. Truman and his aides believed that the war was applauded by the Soviet Union, and that the aggression happened without raging communist armies would arrive at the door to the US. At the meeting, under his presence, Truman and his staff decided to intervene in the war with limited goal to recover status quo on June 24th, 1950. Truman and his cabinet thought that the police action on North Korean aggression should not provoke another war. This was why they had a limited goal for the military action. To conduct the war, US relied on the authority of the United Nations, which was created for collective security for the first time. This was a long time goal of the international community since the outbreak of World War I. The League of Nations was established with the idea right after the war, but failed to prevent World War II. On the occasion of the UN, member states established the Security Council for the function of concert of great powers. In addition, the member states devised ways to create UN forces to enforce UN ideas. Although the UN was not able to have UN forces, the failure of military staff committee, the member states of the United Nations understood the needs of collective behavior to stop North Korean advance, and therefore 16 countries had sent their troops to the Korean Peninsula for the UN action. Using the United Nations was the basic plan for contingents of South Korea and other countries which were excluded from the island defense line into the United States. General Douglas MacArthur took the command of the UN forces. First, he under-evaluated the strength of North Korean forces. However, when the 21st U.S. Infantry Division failed to defend their positions, he understood the reality of the well-equipped and trained North Korean army under the Soviet military advisors. One of the most important jobs of MacArthur was to ask available army units for the war. As mentioned earlier, due to demobilization and reliance on the nuclear bombs, the U.S. did not have enough conventional forces to conduct the war. As a result, the U.S. should mobilize reserve forces and combine existing forces to fill the request of General MacArthur. Fortunately, the 8th Army of the U.S. stayed in Japan at the time of the war, and it became the main body of General MacArthur. However, the reality was the 8th Army did not have enough strength. It reduced its strength severely and focused on administrative works to govern Japan. And because of the work of General MacArthur, the UN forces were able to gain major victories, including the landing on Incheon on September 15, 1950. At this point, the US changed its goal of the war from the recovery of status quo on June 25, 1950 to occupation of the whole peninsula. This seemed to be rational based on the military success that was achieved at the fields. However, it caused the participation of China in the Korean War. Initially, China had a strong will to support North Korean efforts for the war, but did not have opportunities due to the lack of Kim Il-sung's request. Kim did not offer information about the situation of the war. As a result, the Chinese military attaché should move to the front line to get information. In fact, Chinese leaders made their minds to join the war when the U.S. 7th Fleet was dispatched to the Taiwan Strait. President Truman and his aides made a decision to prevent possible aggression of China to Taiwan and vice versa, an invasion by Kuomintang forces to the mainland. Anyway, the Chinese leaders reacted harsh to this movement of the 7th Fleet. More important decisions was made when the UN forces advanced beyond the 30th parallel, regardless of a Chinese warning. To China, northern part of the Korean Peninsula was a precious buffer zone from American imperialism to protect its territory. On top of that, the Chinese leaders were not able to ignore North Korean leaders' requests for help. They had fought together against Japanese forces in the 1930s. Many North Korean leaders were also party members of the Chinese Communist Party. In addition, China owed its success to North Korea from 1947 to 1949. The Chinese Red Army stayed in North Korea to get resupplied and refreshed during fights against the Kuomintang army. Most of all, Mao was at the desperate point to get trust from Stalin. Stalin suspected Mao that China would be Yugoslavia and Mao would be Tito, who sought independence from the Soviet Union. Unlike Yugoslavia, China needed the Soviet help for its industrialization, and this would be possible with the participation in the war. However, the problem was military capacity to deal with US forces in the field. The Communist Chinese forces defeated Kuomintang army, but the US forces were different from the Kuomintang forces. The reality was, Communist Chinese forces did not intend to fight the US troops. Instead, they planned to fight South Korean forces, which were relatively weak compared to the well-equipped US forces. At the same time, the Chinese leaders pursued trench warfare in mountainous areas, not monopoly warfare, as it unintentionally happened later. And this was why communist leaders stuck to the additional participation, even when Stalin gave up his promise for air cover. At this time, Stalin gave up more efforts to save North Korea. He planned to establish a North Korean exile government in Manchuria. Mao, in contrast, continued his decision to support North Korea without Soviet air cover. Chinese expansion changed the direction of the war greatly. The UN forces experienced devastating failures at the engagements with Communist Chinese forces around the end of the year 1950. The US government realized that they could not occupy the whole peninsula and changed its goal to end the war with negotiation. This was the beginning of the long-lasting armistice negotiation. China also realized that they could not defeat US forces in the field. Initially, the Chinese leaders were so encouraged when their forces got victories for 2 times right after their participation. Like Americans, the Chinese leaders changed their goal from recover North Korea to defeat US troops and occupy the whole peninsula. However, the Chinese troops with obsolete weapons could not defeat US forces. When Chinese troops moved by foot, the US forces moved by trucks. Specifically, the Chinese forces lacked Air Force and Navy, which were the symbols of modern warfare, supported by the Industrial Revolution. China also changed its goal again to end the war with negotiation after the end of their fruitless Fifth Offensive in 1951. As a result, the two sides agreed upon the armistice on July 27, 1953. Now I will deal with a little bit current events unfolding in North Asia. The Korean War was conducted under the bipolar system. The US had been the hegemony of the Western world, and the Soviet Union ruled over Eastern society. After the war, the bipolar system followed until the end of the war in 1989. In fact, it may be hard to say that the US and the Soviet Union had equal power to sustain the system. Nevertheless, it would be right to say the system had 2 countering superpowers if we look at just nuclear arsenals. There have been some changes to the bipolar system. The US exploited the Sino-Soviet countries in the 1970s and helped the rise of China as a nuclear power. The US needed support of China to end the Vietnam War and loosen the tension to reduce economic burdens. Meanwhile, Germany and Japan became important countries in the Western Bloc with economic success. Eventually, the unification of Germany and the collapse of all the communist regime in Eastern Europe, especially the Soviet Union, the Cold War ended. However, the Cold War in North East did not end. The Korean Peninsula had been under strict confrontation between South and North Korea. Unlike the Soviet Union, China survived the Cold War with reform and open door policy. Although China established diplomatic and economic ties with South Korea, China still remained as an ally of North Korea. Japan remained as a strong ally of the US too. South Korea and Japan were partners of the US strategy in the region, so-called hub and spoke. Russia was not the same actor as the former Soviet Union in the region, but Russia traditionally opposed the US influence in this region. The continuation of tensions between countries in the region seemed weird compared to cooperation in other regions. Furthermore, the development of North Korean nuclear program increased the tension in this region. North Korea conducted nuclear tests 6 times and launched long-range missiles many times. Maybe the most impressive change would be the rise of China. After the Cold War, economic and military growth of China had brought G2 era. The G2 era is different from the Cold War. Unlike the Soviet Union, China is eager to cooperate with other countries to sustain its economic development. However, the rise of China had introduced uncomfortable situation in the world. Specifically, China confronts with neighboring countries in South China Sea and has conflict with Japan over East China Sea. China, under the leadership of Xi Jinping, is expanding its economic and military reach using its One Belt, One Road initiative. China modernizes its armed forces, including building up sophisticated weapon systems like Dongfeng missiles and aircraft carriers. China pays special attention to decrease its anti-access and area denial capabilities to counter US military power. No one can expect what would be the final situation for the rise of China. Recently, Graham Allison, the United States, published Destined for War. This shows the change of understanding of Americans to look at the rise of China. At the time of the Junior Bush administration, scholars and policymakers regarded China as a stakeholder of current international society. They thought that China would follow international norms and respect customs of global society. However, the continuation of the rise of China and the increase of unacceptable Chinese behaviors strengthen pessimistic perspectives about the future cooperation with China. Michael Pillsbury's 100-year marathon represents this perspective. And Pillsbury argues that China will not be integrated into the Western system and will not pursue status quo. Allison's argument was more provocative. He predicts a possible conflict between China and the US, and based on his analysis on confrontations or hegemony in history. He, of course, suggests avoiding such a conflict beforehand. Now, I'd like to wrap up my lecture to say conclusion. The future of the world dominated by China cannot be easily predicted. Even many experts believe that China cannot suppress the role of the US as world hegemony in terms of military capabilities. In addition, China's economic growth is the subject of suspicion. Unlike the China's economic development were concentrated on specific areas and fields, and the economic inequality is getting worse. Furthermore, China's economy is losing the momentum of its growth recently. In addition, the US achieved energy self-sufficiency with the development of shale oil and shale gas, and will exploit this situation strategically to press China's energy supply. However, with all these claims, it is not possible to deny the reality. China is one of the G2, and it has great influence and is increasing its influence in Northeast Asia. What will be caused by the rise of China? Now, this is a question of researchers at this time. I'd like to quote Graham Allison, do not follow his pessimistic perspective. However, one thing is clear that China will flex its muscles in the politics in adjacent regions, like Northeast Asia. The rise of China, South Korea needs to choose measures not to harm Chinese interests, specifically in terms of military strategy. Third, revenge by China was the most important lessons that South Koreans learned about concerning competing requirements between the alliance and China recently. This was more difficult to select options for its national security. Secondly, the rise of China may offer more room to North Korea to distract or derail the denuclearization process contrary to the expectations of relevant countries, including South Korea. Traditionally, China has attached great importance to the stability of the region, especially the Korean Peninsula. Finally, is there any possibility of a hegemonic war? It may be a tough question to answer. However, human beings have experienced this kind of war. The Peloponnesian War can be the best example. The ancient countries in the Greek society have fought each other for 27 years and lost their perspectives, lost their prosperity and their values like democracy as well as human lives. The war showed us that the fear and suspicion of Sparta toward the essence began the war. The result of the war was terrible. Weak countries were not able to survive the war. Only great powers and strong countries remained after the war. Now is a time to be cautious, not to have a fear and suspicion against each other, and to devise ways to strengthen national capabilities in terms of military and economy to move away from the status of weak countries. This concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Kyengho. Now we will invite questions from the audience. you'd like to ask questions, please raise your hand. Please state your name and your faculty.
Good morning. Thank you for a wonderful presentation, Professor Song. I'm Christopher Reinhardt from History Department here in this university. I'm particularly interested in the Japan and South Korean relation during the Cold War because from what I understand, after the Second World War, the US played a great role in the internal affairs of South Korea and Japan. And by this, I can divine that South Korea and Japan came under the same wing, which is the US wing, the US bloc. And given the situation between South Korea and Japan before this, during the Second World War, how these two countries reacted to each other after the sudden change and they belong to the same bloc. Because we know, until today, Japan and South Korean relation is not quite good, right? So how's your opinion about this?
Thank you, Christopher. It's a very important question. Specifically, we consider current situation that is unfolding. The Prof is unfolding between South and South Korea and Japan. I can say that from 1965, we openly began cooperation with the help of the United States. I really emphasize the help of the United States. So the United States wanted to make these countries in the same bloc, and then we, at the same time, we need each other. In the case of South Korea, we wanted to recover our economy because we had great damage during the Korean War, and also Koreans also at the time remembered technology of Japanese and also needed money from Japan. So that was a great option for South Koreans to get Japanese money and technology to construct our economy and country. However, I'd like to give you another perspective from history. If you look at the Korean War, the United States have used Japan as their real base. So most U.S. troops and United Nations forces spend their leisure time in Japan, and also U.S. provided materials by Japan. They even mobilized Japanese technicians and laborers to conduct the Korean War. With this policy, Japan and Japanese people were able to recover during the Korean War. So, before the Korean War, Japan and Korea actually were able to not openly help, but they understood the system of cooperation under the supervision of the United States. I remember one photo that a South Korean soldier was evacuated to Japan with the air transportation of the United States because the soldier was damaged severely. He got some blood from Japanese in Japan and took some care from a Japanese hospital. So it was a kind of unknown fact of the Korean War. So if we consider these two things, we may expect that there was a kind of conditions to work together and help together. At the same time, I'd like to emphasize the big picture of the Korean War. So once we experienced the Korean War, we were not able to cooperate with China, the Soviet Union, as well as North Korea. So there's only one from the U.S. And also U.S. has great intention to bind Japan and South Korea together. That is the whole picture to see the law of Japan cooperation. Thank you. Is there anyone to have a question? Can I get some questions from ladies? 2 years ago, I visited Wuhan, Indonesian Defense University. After the finish of my lecture, there were a lot of questions, so I remember that.
Yes, any other questions from students? Comment or question? Yes.
Good afternoon, dear sir.
Is that morning?
Good morning, dear sir. My name is Muhammad Lazwari Mani from the Japanese Studies of the University of Indonesia. I have a question. With the conditions today, is North Korea still a threat to the security of East Asia? Conditions nowadays, since the Inter-Korean Summit of 2018, is North Korea still a threat? Thanks for the answer.
Can you repeat the question again, sir? I cannot understand your question correctly.
With the conditions today, with the conditions nowadays, since the especially since the Inter-Korean Summit of 2018, is North Korea no longer a threat to the security and peace in Northeast Asia? That's all.
Yes.
That's my question. Thanks for the answer.
Yeah. Well, actually, I expected a question because we are in the process of denuclearization of North Korea. As the gentleman mentioned, the question, we had Inter-Korean Summit in 2018. We are seeking this process to reduce tensions and further mutual personality in the peninsula. But the problem is,
What?
you mean the problem?
Yes.
Okay. Problem is that the processes are not going well. That is the problem.
Not easy, right? Not easy.
Yes, not easy. Exactly. If you ask why not easy, it's very hard to answer. But the reality is, we still have a lot of obstacles, I think. So we can talk each other later, right?
Okay, any other question or comment maybe from the others? Any other opinion or questions? Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, so I think that concludes our session with Professor Kyengho. Before we end our session today, we're going to have the Manager for Cooperation and Venture, Faculty of Humanities, Ibu Cecilia Halimi, to present token of appreciation for Professor Kyengho. Alright, so that concludes our session for today. We would like to thank Professor Kyengho again for today for the insightful and educational session that we've had, and also for the participants. Thank you for your participation and have a nice day, everyone.